In yesterday's video, I talked about Haytham's Quicken-related teams, so today it's the turn of his Bloom-related teams. In the other video, I've shown how reliant Haytham is on Nahida on spread-based teams, due to his high energy requirements and the overall utility a strong character such as Nahida provides. Many people who lack Nahida were disappointed to hear that, so they might be relieved to hear that the situation changes on his Bloom-related teams. Let's get straight into it. First of all, the role of the Dendro unit differentiates significantly in these teams, depending on whether you're running a pure Bloom team, or a Burgeon/Hyperbloom team. In the first case, the Dendro unit who procs the Bloom is contributing to its damage through his own elemental mastery. Meanwhile, on Hyperbloom or Burgeon, the Dendro is just generating the Blooms, and the proc is caused by the Electro or Pyro unit respectively, meaning the Dendro's elemental mastery has no impact there. In both cases, however, there is one specific attribute the Dendro unit must have for the teams to work, which is big Dendro application to allow a high enough number of Blooms procs. So far, the best unit for that has been by far Nahida, as she combines strong application from her skill, with continuous on-field application through her normal and charged attacks. Notice how I said strong application from her elemental skill. I said that because application strength also plays an important role when you play reaction-based teams in general, and Bloom teams make no exception. I won't go particularly in-depth regarding this, but her elemental skill application has a gauge of 1.5 U, which is on the higher end. In general terms, each elemental application has a gauge, which represents its temporal duration, and it can be decreased through elemental reactions too. Specifically, Dendro and Hydro are tied by a 2-to-1 gauge relation on the Bloom elemental reaction, which basically means the Hydro application on the team will require to double the Dendro application on the team for the latter to be overtaken, something which will require you to inflict more Dendro application if you want to make more Blooms. This is what makes Nahida so convenient, as she has a consistent source of strong Dendro application that works both on field and off field, something that makes her extremely flexible on Bloom-related teams. Compared to her, Haytham should generate a similar amount of Dendro application while on field, throughout a rotation. In fact, I'm counting 18 to 20 procs in 13 seconds of field time, with the variability in procs being caused by the fact it's not easy to count his normal attack-related application yet. Either way, those are pretty high numbers. However, since Haytham doesn't have any way to apply Dendro off-field, that makes him a bit less versatile than Nahida in general. For example, on Nilou Bloom teams, you might require to switch out from him at some point if you're taking too much damage from the Bloom's explosions and enemies. For this reason, I will largely recommend double Dendro lineups for Nilou teams, which should guarantee solid Dendro application even when Haytham isn't on field. For scenarios where Haytham is the only Dendro unit, he'll generally require 170% ER or more if you want him to use his burst every rotation. However, don't let that scare you, since it's okay to use it every other rotation instead if Quicken is out of the picture, as its damage is not very important in that case, and the Dendro application it generates can be replaced by simply extending Haytham's normal and charged attack rotation. So, speaking about a whole Bloom composition in general, granted that the first 2 slots are filled by Nilou and Haytham, the third slot must be filled by a healer, to guarantee your unit stay alive, considering how suicidal this team is. Kokomi is the best option, as she guarantees the most Hydro app off-field through her jellyfish. Barbara is also an option, but her application range is much smaller than Kokomi's, and in general her elemental skill is inconsistent proc-wise, as it only generates a pulse when a new opponent enters its small radius. For the 4th slot, as I said before, a second Dendro unit to make the Dendro application more consistent would be helpful, but it's not a must, as you can even use an additional Hydro unit like Yelan or Xingqiu if you feel like it. In that case, the Hydro application will likely overtake Dendros, but it's not a bad thing as long as you get around 20 Bloom procs per rotation regardless. Regarding artifacts, using a Deepwood set to enhance Bloom's damage for the whole team is a must, so put that on Haytham if you don't have anybody else to use it on. If you do, Gilded Dreams is the best option, since it provides more elemental mastery compared to the other option, the Paradise Lost set, increasing Haitham's damage as a whole. Of course, for this team, you'll need as much elemental mastery as possible on your Haitham, meaning Sands, Goblet and Circlet should all have EM main stats, possibly with good crit substats as well, since Haitham's raw damage here is still relevant, despite being lower than on other compositions. For Hyperbloom, things are more straightforward. Since this composition is not as risky as Nilou Bloom to use in terms of damage received, using Haitham as your only Dendro unit should largely be fine. Starting from him, you can go two ways. You can either use 2 Electro units such as Fischl and Kuki, to maintain more quicken uptime, hence a variation of Quick Bloom, or 2 Hydro units, such as Xingqiu and Yelan, or Kokomi as well, to maximize the Bloom procs. In either scenario, you'll always require at least an Electro unit to proc the Hyperbloom, and either Kuki or Raiden work very well in that role. You should use the full Deepwood set on Haitham in this scenario. As I said in the previous video, using a Dendro duo in Quick Bloom is also possible, and it might be the best version of that team granted you have Nahida. For Burgeon, the case is slightly different, as running 2 Pyro units on team doesn't always have the same benefits as using 2 Electro units on Hyperbloom, since you'll be likely to proc the burning elemental reaction on opponents if you have too much Pyro application on your team, something that might severely disrupt your Dendro application. For this reason, you should use one between Xiangling or Toma on one slot, and if you want a Bennett in the second slot to lower their ER requirements, and have an additional source of healing. In the Pyro role, you can even use Kazuha, since the infusion he'd get when paired with Bennett would guarantee he'd proc Burgeons. That leaves 1 or 2 spots for Hydro units. Running 2 would minimize the risk of burning ruining your Bloom proc consistency, so that's something to keep in mind. For both Hyperbloom and Burgeon, of course, you should go for a more traditional build on Haitham, since those reactions won't scale off his own EM. If you want more info on that, refer to my artifacts video about him. I'm done for today. Just like yesterday's video, this one isn't meant to be a conclusive take on these teams for Haitham, nor a perfect estimation of these teams' power level. It's just meant to be a general take on what could work best for him, and what type of teams you should start working on while you wait for his release. If you liked what I provided, make sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe. See you next time.